Welcome. Happy NISAW. Greetings. It is our final day and final webinar for the 2025 National Invasive Species Awareness Week. Our theme for this year's NISAW is Enhancing North American Biosecurity to Protect Against Invasive Species. My name is Christy Trifon-Millhouse, your NISAW Executive Director. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes I was sharing with those folks coming in. Find the chat box, share with us where you're joining from. Also, after our presentations today, please feel free to use the reaction button to let our presenters know that you enjoyed their topic. We'll be hosting a brief Q&A after the webinars, so questions do need to be added to the Q&A box. If you pop them in the chat, we're going to ask you to put them in the Q&A. So please utilize that opportunity. NISAW is an international event powered by the North American Invasive Species Management Association, also known as NISAW. NISAW is an event where we raise awareness about invasive species, the threat they pose, and what can be done to prevent their spread. NISAW provides a platform for individuals from state, local, federal, tribal agencies, regional organizations, private industry, and citizens to discuss legislation, policies, resources, and improvements that can be made with our elected officials and decision makers. This has certainly been a week, not only for learning, but for action. And I'm sure many of you took advantage of the musters we've been sending out and sharing on your networks. But for those that haven't, we encourage you to take action. We have throughout the week shared links in an effort to connect you with your U.S. senators and House representative. And there still is time. We will share those links with you and encourage you to take action at the end of the presentation. We want our leaders to hear our collective voice and to learn about the importance of our work and why we need funding and support to continue to press forward. For those of you who still want to take an active role this week, please head to NISAW.org, find our NISAW toolkit filled with template social posts, press releases, PSAs, and more. For those that are currently connected to us on socials, keep sharing those posts. We want to reach even more people than we did last year. For those that aren't currently connected, please go and find us and start sharing information during NISAW. The agenda this week has been just incredible. Presentations have focused on our theme of enhancing biosecurity at all levels. Presentations yesterday highlighted all the work that our partners at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers are taking on related to biosecurity. I encourage you to visit our website. For those that weren't able to attend webinars, we will have those posted up on our YouTube with connections off our website. Certainly reach out if you're having challenges accessing those presentations. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our agenda changed quite a bit over the last month and changed throughout this week, and wanted to thank you for your patience and understanding. I'd like to take a moment to thank those federal employees who have invested their energy and heart into this work. Some are no longer leading those efforts, while others are still holding strong. NISAW is driven, as I mentioned, by education and action. And as a partner, we recognize that now is not the time for us to take a step back and sit down, but rather to stand up and move forward together. So I encourage you to activate your networks behind our calls to action, and as a partner to provide support to programs locally that need a bit of glue right now in any way that you can. Through partnership and collaboration, we are stronger. And this is really the essence of our work here at NISAW. As leaders of NISAW, we are deeply vested in our mission to empower invasive species management across North America. We are led by an 18-member board of leading experts and professionals with supporting committees that I encourage you to check out and join. We have a strong NISMA team and a membership that continues to grow by numbers. NISAW is a far-reaching event. Last year, we were able to connect with over 2.9 million people. We'd love to reach even more this year. So like I said, get on your socials and share. Here at NISMA, we provide the connections, tools, and voice you need to address invasive species, and we frame our programs around these three core pillars. We work hard to provide opportunities for collaboration and connection through our webinars, summits, and annual conference. We equip our membership and those in the invasive species community with the tools needed to manage and educate the public about invasive species. And finally, we strive to provide a collective voice on a national platform to advocate for relevance and support through our government relations programming and events like today's NISAW. Some of our upcoming events you won't want to miss: the 2025 National Forum on Biological Control will be held in Annapolis, Maryland from April 14th through the 17th. The meeting themes revolve around biocontrol research, management, and impacts in natural areas. We've got some great speakers lined up, and I encourage you to register today if you're interested in networking in person with members from the biocontrol community. Another great event you won't want to miss is the 2025 NISMA Annual Conference. Mark your calendars and plan to join us, folks, in Lake Tahoe from November 3rd through the 6th. Our theme this year is charting a new course. We've got some great speakers and keynotes lined up already, and I do hope to see you all there. Again, head to nisma.org. Registration is open. One of the ways that NISMA creatively funds our mission-driven work is through our NISMA shop. So this week, we're hosting a special on our handheld boot brushes to celebrate NISAW. But there are other products on our website that you can purchase to help support our mission. Make sure to head to the shop through nisma.org today. As a friendly reminder, membership helps to support our mission as well. So if you're not currently a member, we offer a variety of different membership options. This membership structure just updated this year, so we have new opportunities for folks. And you can view this new structure on our website. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Another new opportunity here at NISMA is our new sponsorship program. Our Premier Partner Program is designed for those that would like to make an investment in NISMA in a bigger way. Premier Partners enjoy benefits throughout the year, including acknowledgement on our website, at events, and more. Again, questions, feel free to reach out. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank all of our 2025 current Premier Partners. Your generosity made NISAW and all of our NISMA programming possible. So thank you. We hope to add to this list over the course of the next year. Okay, now time for a main event. I'd like to introduce NISMA's Government Relations Manager, Mara Cunningham, who will be moderating our webinar today. Mara?
Hi, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Christy said, I'm Mara Cunningham. I'm NISMA's Government Relations Manager, and I'll be helping to moderate our session today. Our webinar is titled Strategic Prevention Initiatives Having Impact at Multiple Scales. It will highlight examples of strategic and collaborative prevention projects that were recipients of the Department of the Interior's Notice of Funding opportunity that was offered in 2022. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service administered this funding opportunity on behalf of multiple Department of Interior bureaus to support projects preventing the introduction and spread of invasive species through landscape-level approaches. Presenters will provide an overview of the progress made. So first, we're going to hear from Zach Burnside, the Invasive Species Program Manager for Wildlife Forever, who will be presenting on rapid deployment of watercraft cleaning stations. Zach, whenever you're ready, you can share your slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful to be presenting today on the project we completed back in 2022 and 2023, some of the findings and outcomes of that work. So this was a project that we undertook to assess risk across public access points throughout the Columbia River Basin in Washington, where, like everywhere else, we're trying to protect from aquatic invasive species. So we identify using several metrics which accesses represent the most significant threats in terms of how much traffic is moving through the area, what species are in the surrounding area, etc. And then we come up with a list of sites that we go in and say, okay, here are the solutions to minimize the risk posed at this access. And I'll get into this in a little bit, but this project really aligns with a lot of the work we've been doing across the West, in our home state here in Minnesota, down south, and really touching most parts of the country at this point. So again, the project is rapid deployment of watercraft cleaning stations, and thanks for the opportunity to be here today. So this project was sort of launched by the one that came before it. In 2022, Wildlife Forever published the Access Enhancement Guidebook. And this guidebook contains the protocol that was developed to take a critical look at a public access point and identify the specific conditions that make it higher or lower risk for spreading invasive species. And with the guidebook, assuming that you'll eventually find a high-risk access, it proceeds to lay out a process for a systematic site redesign or retrofit process to improve that site and lessen its risk as a pathway through which AIS are spreading. And the guidebook breaks the process down into 6 steps. Conveniently abbreviated as ACCESS, ACCESS. And if there's only one thing that you take away from this presentation as a site manager or administrator today, it should be this right here. Assess, coordinate, communicate, evaluate, supply, and standardize. With these 6 steps completed, you can have a redesigned site that is going to be less susceptible to participating in the inbound or outbound spread of invasive species. So I'll run through these here. The first thing you're going to do is assess. What are your goals? Well, probably to stop the spread. And how much ground do you want to cover? Well, probably all of it. So let's start more simply. How much time do you have? How much resources do you have? You might end up starting with your top 3 to 5 busiest sites, or you might have the capacity to look at a few more than that. Here, we're simply putting together a table of contents for the rest of the work that we're going to complete. So for each individual site, again, the assess was for your entire selection of sites. Now we're getting more granular here. For each individual site, we recommend that you coordinate. This work is best done in collaboration with stakeholders, decision makers. You might have a local friends group with a vested interest. And then these steps here get kind of out of order, but if we switch them around, it wouldn't make such a nice acronym. So after we coordinate, we evaluate. That's when we visit the site, take an inventory of the infrastructure, the signage, the existing populations of invasive species at the lake and in the surrounding area. And I like to call this step the risk assessment step. Once we've finished that, we've identified what the site does and doesn't have, and that tells us what the site needs. Surveys and studies have consistently demonstrated 2 things. Number 1, a significant portion of boaters and anglers report getting their information at the access. And number 2, the greatest cited reason for not following clean, drain, dry best management practices at the access is a lack of available tools. So if the access is lacking those 2 things, the signage and the tools, we supply it. Implementation of the signage and the tools at the access directly addresses the reports from the recreational community that they want tools and they want educational signage. So now we jump back a couple letters here to our second C, which is communicate. We've already started doing some of that in the supply step with posting some of that signage, but now we take it a step further. Put that message out into the community, locally and digitally, from billboards to social media ads and everywhere in between, spreading the message that it's up to all of us to prevent the spread. This repetition of messaging is critical in influencing behavior change. And that brings us down to standardize. We're using similar messages, similar graphics, similar images, and it's all a really cohesive and consistent message being deployed in several locations throughout the community to really get people to recognize the brand, recognize the clean, drain, dry steps, and then to buy in and make those investments meaningful once they visit the access, find the cleaning station, and are empowered to use those tools. So the Access Enhancement Guidebook, which I just finished detailing in a high-level overview, was developed back in 21-22 under a separate grant where we actually were able to take a trip down to Monroe, Louisiana and the Black Bayou National Wildlife Refuge. And we put the protocol to the test here and showed that it had the power to simplify access retrofitting and or redesign. And as you can see here on the left hand side of the screen here are a few of the existing site features. We're looking at the available infrastructure, the types of watercraft that are going in and out of this water body, the species that are present at this water body and in the surrounding areas. And then we're recommending solutions that have been proven to work and that the recreational user is saying that they would use. And then you can see on the right side here, we took a signage inventory and we found signs posted at 6 different locations just at this one access site. And so this can lead to a lot of different problems, some message variation and contrast, signage fatigue from the user. So what we did is we took the information that was contained on all of those signs, and one of our recommendations was to centralize that messaging into one colorful, visually appealing structure that you can see on the left side. Still includes space for temporary bulletin posting, but really just coming up with solutions that work here, both for the access manager, including all of the information that they have required to display at the site, but then also making it work for the visitors. So making something that's attractive, something that they're going to go up and actually take the time to read. Now I'm going to introduce you the next step, getting us to where we're going here. So this is happening concurrently, but slightly later, maybe a couple of months after the site selection in the Columbia River Basin. So this is December 22. I'm just coming on board here at Wildlife Forever at the time, and the sites were already being finalized in Washington, but we also had this concurrent project going on with the Bureau of Land Management, which really allowed me to take what was done to select the sites in the Columbia River Basin and put that on paper and come up with a nice looking report here that'll kind of give you an idea of what was happened or what had happened in the Columbia River Basin, but wasn't compiled into, like I said, such a nice looking report. So we have our access enhancement protocol and we want to take it out into the field. So as was done in Washington, this time we're in the West broadly, looking at accesses owned by the Bureau of Land Management. And the project, this one actually did not include funding for implementation of the recommendations, but the goal was simply to take an inventory of what's out there and develop recommendations for future mitigation through future funding opportunities. So when we first started out, we went to USGS and asked for a report of every public water access within 10 kilometers of Bureau of Land Management lands. So the thinking being that if somebody is within 10 kilometers, it's probably pretty likely that they might end up on BLM lands at some point. The proximity of those just makes it a likelihood that they could end up spreading. So we wanted all of that included in our initial list of access points. What we didn't expect, or what we maybe should have expected, is that gave us a list of more than 6,000 public access points, which we obviously had to start cutting down on. So we first cut out everything that didn't lie on BLM lands, even though we still have the conviction that it's important to look at those as threats as well. We cut out all of the accesses that didn't have boat ramps. So these could be walk-in kayak access points or others that probably don't have as much traffic as some of the ones we did end up looking at. And then we continued narrowing down that list with using different parameters until we ended up on a list of 12 sites that we followed the risk assessment and site prescription portion of the ACC-ESS process. And as I mentioned previously, one of the steps in the protocol is evaluate. That's the E, or my risk assessment step. And in ideal conditions, we'd be able to visit every access. but we don't always have the resources or the capacity. But fortunately, there are other ways still to take an inventory of a remote access. Satellite imagery that's available on Google Maps or other mapping tools, or even sometimes you can drop the little guy on the Google Maps, the little yellow guy, to get a 360-degree view. And that allows you to take a look at the signage and what some of the messages are being displayed there. You can get drone images, or you can find a local stakeholder to visit these sites for you. For this project and the project in the Columbia River Basin, we used partners on the ground in those locations to evaluate the access sites using a spreadsheet checklist. And here's an example of one site that we looked at in Colorado. And as you can see, we had a wonderful volunteer from Colorado Parks and Wildlife help us fill this out and gather the data on the site. Some of the things that you can see we're looking for is the number of parking spaces, including those that are large enough for trailers. What are the busiest times of year? Is there an inspector or a decontamination unit available? Are there trash cans, bathrooms, cell service, electricity? Just really trying to paint a picture of the site. And then we're also having them take pictures of everything for us so we can get the information that's displayed on all of the signage, see the condition of the pavement or the gravel or the actual ramp itself. And like I said, just really get a clear picture of what's going on there. And several common themes emerged from the sites surveyed on the BLM lands that aligned with the themes at the sites surveyed in Washington. AIS signage was generally not present at these sites. Prevention tools, cleaning stations were not present at any of the sites we visited. None of the sites had watercraft inspectors stationed, and it was extremely rare to ever find a decontamination station within 15 miles of any of these sites. And 15 miles on BLM lands, that could be a 45-minute drive. So really looking at the proximity of some of the control measures that we have available to us. And then finally, every site that we surveyed either had existing populations of an invasive species or were within 10 miles of population. Here's an example of a risk assessment and a site prescription for one access point that we looked at. This one was located in Montana. And you'll see that page 1 of the document is the risk assessment, and then page 2 is the site prescription. You'll see those ACCESS, those access steps arising from the pages here. You can see we've identified the access manager, the site administrator, taken inventory of the space, the infrastructure, the user demographics that are using this public access. We've taken satellite imagery and overlaid the location of the boat ramp, the trash cans, the parking area, the direction of travel that people are going to be following in and out of the access. And note that there was no signage at this access. Based on the existing conditions that we were able to see here, this access was classified as high risk. So then on page 2, we're identifying the recommendations to mitigate that risk. We recommended a large cleaning station infrastructure for this site, just given the volume of traffic that comes through, the amount of space. This one is the CD3 solar wayside unit, and this cleaning station has pressurized air, a wet dry vacuum, a brush, a grabber tool, a plug wrench, and lights for those early morning or late night clean drain dry sessions. This would be the best case scenario for this site. But then we also want to show that a smaller toolbar type cleaning kiosk would also be beneficial if that's what the resources require. In this case, we've shown one from Magic Solutions, which is a local company for us here in Minnesota and the inventor of the Aqua Weed Stick. We recommend either cleaning station be attached or have a sign or be wrapped fully with clean drain dry graphics, and that messaging continue on to signage that details the invasive species issue and identifies the specific watch species in this area. So you can see on the mock-up sign below the second cleaning station here, there's the clean drain dry sign that has the general clean drain dry information, what's the issue and why should you care about it. And then down below, it has 3 separate watch species signs. And this modular setup, having 4 different pieces instead of one 48 by 48 inch sign, makes it easier to change and update when needed. If there's any regulations or guidelines that are released for the specific area, if one species for whatever reason falls off the watch list and can be replaced with another one, it's a little bit more cost effective with that modular setup. And then finally at the bottom with the media and marketing, we're recommending that community-wide outreach. Get the message out into the community and drive users to participate in Clean Drain Dry at the access. So now we can get back to the Columbia River Basin. This is a map showing the 14 sites that we identified for implementing these science-based solutions for risk mitigation at the public accesses. You'll see that we were able to deploy 6 wayside units. These are the larger cleaning stations with all the bells and whistles, and then 8 roadside units, which are more similar to the smaller unit shown on the previous slide. And every station installed as part of this project was made by CD3 Systems, a local to Minnesota-based manufacturer who Wildlife Forever actually worked alongside several years ago to develop this equipment. And the equipment is assembled in Minnesota using American-made parts, and it's something that's built to last and really built to empower the local user to put aside the excuse of a lack of tools and practice clean, drain, dry at their local lake. You'll see on the list there on the left side, we have pretty significant representation from several different partners in this project. You see we have a handful of state parks. We're working with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife there. We're working with cities. For example, the city of Chelan manages the Manson Public Access at Lake Chelan, counties, power companies, and we were working with a tribe at one point as well, but due to their approval process, they eventually had to withdraw their candidacy to receive one of these stations. But again, we're looking at future opportunities to continue building that network of partners out in the Columbia River Basin with cleaning infrastructure. I have some photos here showing a couple of the cleaning stations loaded up on the covered flatbed for transport. As the managers of the grant and being close partners with CD3 Systems, we made this a really seamless operation with white glove service, delivering these units in most cases directly to the access upon which they will call their home. In a few of the cases, at the time of delivery, the access had 2 or 3 feet of snow for at least one of the accesses I can recall that was a little higher up in the mountains. And in those cases, we had the units delivered to a storage warehouse. Here on the left side, you can see an installed solar wayside station. And then on the right, you can see one of those roadside stations that's been installed. And one thing you'll notice in these photos is that the water is directly in the background of these units. It's so critical that the cleaning stations are placed as closely to the boat ramp as possible. Of course, leaving enough room for other boaters to navigate. But we always recommend installing within 200 feet of the access for maximum visibility and use. If you'll recall back on the risk assessment and site prescription document that I had up earlier, using that satellite map where we're mapping out the infrastructure and the flow of traffic, we're doing the same as part of the recommendations. So placing that signage and that infrastructure, depending on whether you have an inbound priority or an outbound priority of where the actual population is coming from or potentially moving to, you might be placing those along the outbound traffic or along the inbound traffic. Or in some cases, you may find a situation where it can be centrally located and work for both parties, which would be ideal. So there are a lot of options and steps at various levels that we can recommend in terms of cost, in terms of time, in terms of resources, in order to reduce the risk of invasive species spread. There are some really simple options like a toolbar with an aqua weed stick that we've seen partners build for 50 or 60 bucks. And then there are some more developed but still simple cleaning stations that could be installed for a couple thousand. Or at a really large access with a lot of traffic coming through, it might make sense to spend $30,000 to $40,000 and put one of those larger cleaning units in. They come with all of the tools needed to clean, drain, and dry at all hours of the day, with those solar powered lights. And then they also have a built-in software that tracks tool uses, sessions, identifying different users, and then monitors the capacity of the vacuum tank. And all of this information is accessible online to the site administrator. So that $30,000 to $40,000 number could be a shocking price tag, but you think of some of the alternatives. Consider a $250,000 decontamination unit, or consider the cost of having a watercraft inspector stationed at the access for however many days that's in the budget for. And then knowing that these machines are rated to last 10 plus years in the field. So it really becomes a more digestible figure when you're looking at, maybe $3,000 to $4,000 in equipment costs, plus a few $100s to empty out the vacuum tank each year. That becomes a little more manageable to understand and digest. And then I would be remiss not to emphasize the importance of going beyond just installing the equipment and calling it a day. Social science calls for more than that. The billboards, the social media ads, the posters at the bait shops and at the gas stations. There's a real oversaturation of advertising in our world that really requires us to participate in that. And so it's so important to spread that message far and wide of Clean Drain Dry, of the cleaning stations that we've invested on installing at our local accesses, and of the importance of doing our part to prevent the spread of AIS. And finally, at local events, fairs, parades, and at the access with the watercraft inspectors, have conversations with people, talk to them, ask them if they've heard of Clean Drain Dry, ask them if they've seen the cleaning station that we've just installed, and give them a key float or a brochure or a towel, some kind of outreach material that they can remember that message next time they're pulling their boat out. We've got watercraft inspector outfitting, display and event materials to jazz up your outreach booth, outreach kits, individual items, and more available on our website. I just want to reiterate that the project is one that's scalable, replicable, and should be replicated at every public access that's getting significant traffic. The boater and angler pathway is one that we've identified solutions to address, and not taking them would be a mismanagement of our resources. So for all of the managers here today, we all know that prevention is so much more cost-effective than control. And the economies that depend on the recreation and the water tourism, they multiply the potential consequences even more than just the loss of the resources. With that being said, we have a planned project upcoming at a national wildlife refuge down in Florida, just around the corner, and we continue to seek opportunities to do this work elsewhere. So thank you for your time, everyone. And it sounded like a Q&A would be held at the end here, so I'll stop sharing and we can continue here.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. Yes, we will be doing a Q&A at the end of all the presentations. So go ahead and type in that Q&A box if you have a comment or question. Next up, we have Dr. Nick Holmes and Annie Little presenting on strengthening the California Islands Biosecurity Program to leverage outcomes for biosecurity on U.S. Department of Interior islands. Nick is Associate Director of Oceans at the California chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and Annie is the Supervisory Natural Resource Manager for Channel Islands National Park of the National Park Service. Whenever you both are ready, you can go ahead and take over.
Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining today. My name is Nick Holmes, and I'm with the Nature Conservancy. And we thought that it would be best for us to give our presentation in a partnership. So Annie works for Channel Islands National Park, and biosecurity is very much a shared responsibility that we have here in the California Channel Islands. And so we thought it'd be great to tee off our presentation for this webinar by splitting the responsibility, much like we do for biosecurity. So with that, I would like to hand over to my colleague and friend, Annie Little.
Thanks, Nick, and thanks everybody for having us here today. We're excited to talk about our program on the Channel Islands. Okay, just to orient us a little bit of where we're working, the California Channel Islands are a series of 8 islands located off of Southern California. And within this grouping of islands, we have 5 islands that are part of Channel Islands National Park, including Santa Cruz Island, which is co-managed by and co-owned with the Nature Conservancy. There are an additional 2 islands, San Nicolas and San Clemente, that are owned by the U.S. Navy, and also Santa Catalina Island, which is owned and managed by the Catalina Island Conservancy. The national park is also surrounded by 6 nautical miles of marine sanctuary, the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary, which is administered by NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The major activities among the islands, it's really varied. We have everything from protection and management to military activities, recreational, commercial activities. So a wide variety of uses of the Channel Islands. And really what makes this archipelago, we really consider ourselves one archipelago, even though we're separate landowners and separate managers. And we really do work together closely within our region, both on all sorts of conservation issues, but invasive species in particular. And I would just like to in particular notice the partnership between the Nature Conservancy and the Park Service. We co-manage one island, so really as one ecological unit. The Nature Conservancy owns and manages 74% of Santa Cruz Island, and we own and manage the remaining 24%. The California Channel Islands are known as the Galapagos of North America, and that's in part because of the high number of endemic species we have. An example of that is the island scrub jay, photographed here. This is a single island endemic, only found on Santa Cruz Island. And ecologically, these islands, the 8 islands, were also connected to islands that extend down into Mexico. We share similar resources, also conservation challenges, and we really try and work together as partners across the whole archipelago. These islands really truly do hold exceptional natural and cultural resources. For example, we host and are home to regionally significant populations of seabirds that are not found on the mainland, but they're nesting on these protected, isolated islands. So the Channel Islands have had a long history of human occupation and influence, starting over 13,000 years ago with native Chumash making their home on the islands for many thousands of years. And then a wide range of uses and inhabitants on the islands, everything from the European explorers, Chinese abalone fishermen, uses for military purposes. And most recently, sort of the most recent era was a ranching era that began in the 1800s. The Channel Islands National Park was established in 1980. And so it's a relatively young park compared to other parks out there. And it was established to protect the nationally significant natural, scenic, wildlife, marine, ecological, historical, archaeological, cultural, and scientific values of the Channel Islands. That's a mouthful, but it really shows just the diversity of resources that are on the islands and the reasons to protect them. So we've had a variety of conservation challenges on these islands. I think the ranching era most recently really had a widespread and significant ecological impact on the vegetation communities. This is a picture showing sheep on Santa Cruz Island. Large portions of the islands were heavily ranched, and essentially the native vegetation communities were denuded, and a lot of loss of topsoil and erosion across the island. So really the introduction of these non-native grazers had a significant influence and was a significant conservation challenge to overcome. The Park Service and many other partners, the Nature Conservancy and others in particular, worked for multiple decades to remove these invasive mammals. So everything from the sheep to black rats, feral cats, deer, pigs, just a wide range of species have been removed over time just due to a lot of sustained commitment, strong partnerships, and a vision for how these islands could be into the future. The islands became grazer-free at different points in time, but collectively they have been grazer-free since 2013. And really now the focus of management is on ecological restoration and protecting the investments to date. And that really folds back to biosecurity because so much effort was put into removing these invasive animals. We really want to maintain these islands free going into the future. Some of the most recent conservation challenges as well have been invasive plant species. Those are, a challenge. We have numerous invasive plants that are widespread on the islands. Also invasive ants. We have a current program to eradicate Argentine ants on Santa Cruz Island. And biosecurity, that's an area of focus that has really taken step up in importance with now the removal of all those grazers. And we have these are the main three pillars of biosecurity. These are across the board that island managers and others use. We focus mostly on prevention. That's really the most cost-effective pillar to focus on. And really, prevention is key. Why? Well, one, detection is difficult. These are remote islands. Also, oftentimes we may not detect the presence of an invasive species until it's too late, until they're already established. And even if we do detect them, sometimes it's infeasible to remove them. It might be too costly to do so. So we really want to make sure that they don't reach the islands in the first place. And also, even if you are able to remove the invasive species, sometimes the ecological damage can carry on for many decades. So again, prevention is really the focal area that we are concentrating on. And we do that via inspections, everything going out to the islands, personal cargo, construction materials, those kinds of things undergo inspections. Also prohibiting certain items, like we don't allow firewood to go out to the islands, use cardboard boxes, for example, trying to limit the introduction of diseases or pathogens by prohibiting certain items to go out. We have things like specific contract language that we include in contracts for construction. Again, making sure equipment is cleaned, trying to source materials to the best way that we can, having them as lead-free as possible or sterile, for example, trying to incorporate that language into contracts so everybody has expectations about what the biosecurity rules are. And of course, education and outreach, both to visitors that come out to the island, to boaters that may go out there, researchers that are going across the island, really trying to have a campaign of outreach and education to reach the different users of the islands. In terms of detection, we have a series of camera monitoring stations across the islands to try and detect at main points of entry any, just uses of camera and that sort of detection for the off chance that we might be able to detect, a rat or something coming in onto the island. And of course, people's observations are really key, and having a mechanism to report those observations. That's a key part of detection. And then we also do annual routine surveys at our points of entry. So things like campgrounds or airstrips or areas around docks and where people are funneling to the islands. We have regular annual surveys, for example, for invasive plants that we go each spring and make sure that we're identifying and treating as quickly as possible any new introduced species. And then finally, response, that is, the most costly aspect of biosecurity. And in order to have an effective response, you really need to be prepared up front. So having the plans in place, the SOPs and the best management practices, standard operating procedures, having those things and the materials on hand already to be able to respond quickly. And an example of that we have out on the islands is if we had, say, a shipwreck come, we have these rat spill kits that we have stage on each island that we can deploy immediately on the grounded vessel to try and intercept any, like a rat or something that might be on the island or on the vessel before it reaches shore. So those are just some examples of biosecurity that we have for the park. And I think, Nick, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Annie. So we were very fortunate that between 2022 and this year, 2025, received some support from the Fish and Wildlife Service for biosecurity in the Channel Islands. And we saw this as an opportunity in two parts. One, as you can see from how Annie has really communicated well, the conservation trajectory that we're on in the Channel Islands and how biosecurity has become an increasingly important part that we are navigating and learning how to implement in our multi-stakeholder environment. So this was an excellent opportunity for us to continue moving on that conservation trajectory by strengthening the existing Channel Islands investments into biosecurity. And second, we were here at the Nature Conservancy and with partners at the Fish and Wildlife Service, we're increasingly aware of opportunities to strengthen biosecurity on other Department of Interior islands across the nation and within the freely associated states out in the Western Pacific. So, for example, the US Department of Interior has led an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding on Island Restoration, and it includes many partners in the public space and also in the private space where they're attempting to share lessons learned and optimize to improve natural resource management outcomes on islands all across the US. So we became aware of both of those opportunities and sought to work to strengthen both of those outcomes. And on the screen is a great example of one of the outcomes that we are seeking to avoid. And what you're looking at is Argentine ants, which are a non-native invasive species in California and particularly on the Channel Islands. And these Argentine ants swamp and outcompete native ants and other native invertebrates. And on the screen, what you're looking at is a sweat bee. And a sweat bee would otherwise be normally performing its functional role, pollinating flowers and moving around, probably food for other animals. And so, of course, as Annie mentioned, we are seeking to eradicate Argentine ants from Santa Cruz Island, and we're moving along very strongly in that space. But of course, there's no point eradicating if we can't prevent their arrival, or if they do arrive, be prepared to rapidly respond. So biosecurity is inherently tied to many of the other conservation investments that we're making in the Channel Islands, and we take that quite seriously. So an example of one of the milestones that we sought to achieve with this work over the past 3 years is a biosecurity planning toolkit. And as Annie mentioned earlier, there's a lot of really amazing people and organizations that are working in this space, both through focusing on protection, but also restoration through science and education and on-the-ground management. And for us, knowledge sharing has become a really large part of this island community's interactions. And we achieve that through mediums like a regular California Islands symposia. Some of you may have attended some of these in the past. We have dedicated gatherings of experts for things like rare plants, and we have a quarterly forum to discuss biosecurity. And another thing that we do is we have a California Islands website, and within that, there is a biosecurity section. And we're really pleased to announce that we have the addition of a biosecurity toolkit. And this is hosted on this California Islands website. You can see the link up there and how to get to it. And this toolkit serves as sort of as a collection of programmatic and operational and educational materials that can be adapted for use by island conservation managers and stakeholders. And we are thinking specifically about our California stakeholders, but also now increasingly about others that may have the opportunity to benefit from the materials that we have been building. And so when we say toolkit, what we mean is this is not a step-by-step guide to creating a biosecurity program from the ground up. Rather, it's a set of building blocks that others in island protected area space can borrow from or combine or modify based on their needs and capacities. And we say that deliberately because archipelagos will need a specific biosecurity planning that needs to be accounted for. So we built these both through our own efforts and through maintaining this biosecurity program for the Channel Islands, and also from lessons learned from other island biosecurity programs from around the world. We have materials on here from New Zealand, from the Aleutians, from all manner of different places. And it's actually quite fascinating, in particular, to see the similarities across this space, the use of language and that general framework and process that we all follow. So we've structured the toolkit into three very basic sections, what we call foundational documents, and then prevention-oriented materials, and then early detection and rapid response. And I would call out that we follow that common international vernacular that biosecurity is a continuum, whereby the goal is to prevent pests establishing on islands, meaning prevention before arriving on the island, but also early detection and rapid response once on the island are also part of island biosecurity. And underpinning those prevention, detection, and rapid response actions are foundational documents, most conspicuously a biosecurity plan and risk analyses, but also resources to ensure biosecurity is streamlined into more day-to-day activities. And two key documents that we needed, and we see a lot of utility elsewhere, is standard language for use in contracts for goods and services that the Nature Conservancy or the National Park Service might need on the islands, and biosecurity language that's suitable for position descriptions to go into annual work plans, not just for people that might have a high degree of their or a high proportion of their FTE dedicated to biosecurity, but every staff person that has some sort of connectivity or responsibility to ensuring that these invasive pests do not become established on islands. And as Annie mentioned, we've placed a great deal of emphasis on the pre-visit prevention, as this has the greatest likelihood of preventing pests from reaching the island. And in the Channel Islands, we've created communication tactics that correspond to different types of visitors to the island: recreational yachties, our own staff, scientists, school groups, and tourists. And while some of the prevention tactics, the communications tactics are relevant to all groups, like please make sure you've got clean shoes and personal gear, some visitor types have unique or very high risk pathways. For example, our own staff and the contractors that they may bring on are much more likely to be the only ones that bring high risk materials like lumber or gravel out to the islands. And I note that we ourselves are just putting the finishing touches on our risk analysis, and we're beginning a final task of redoing our biosecurity plan, both of which are going to be put up on the website once they are complete. Another novel activity that we undertook and we thought would be valuable to communicate here today was we undertook an audit for island biosecurity. And by audit, we mean a third-party evaluation by experts. Now, we're not familiar with audits for island biosecurity being done elsewhere in the USA, but we do know they are regular and even required actions in other parts of the world, like New Zealand. So we understood this to be a relatively novel action in the USA, and we saw this as an opportunity to cast a wide net and ask for expert support, not just from the USA, but elsewhere around the world, where island biosecurity like ours is a key management action. So we did that by soliciting expertise from here in the USA, but also in Australia and New Zealand. And ultimately, we worked with experts from New Zealand. On the screen is an example that's very relevant to the Channel Islands, and that's from the Hauraki Gulf in the North Island of New Zealand. And in general, New Zealand has a very mature and sophisticated approach to biosecurity, not just at a national scale, but also at archipelago scales. Like us, often with multiple landowners and stakeholders. So again, I really want to stress here that we benefited greatly from the foundational partnerships and the trust that has built here in the Channel Islands. And although the Nature Conservancy implemented the audit through contractors, the US Navy and the Channel Islands National Park openly participated in this audit, which is very much to their credit. We've completed the audit late last year, and we're in the process of having a summary written up that could be posted on the California Islands website that I showed you. I can tell you that some of the key lessons we obtained really reflect where we are at on that trajectory for improving biosecurity. Some of the key lessons are that everybody has a role, much like you would think of in occupational health and safety. And thus, it's important to ensure that there is adequate capacity to implement and clear responsibilities are spelled out for everybody in that space. This is not a segue, trust me, but we just wanted to step back at this point so I could provide a bit of context about the second phase of what we are doing with our supported work. And really, what we wanted to point out here is that the US has quite a remarkable island geography when you step back and you look at it. There are islands in multiple oceans in both hemispheres. And in fact, on the map, I apologize because even in the Great Lakes, there is quite a remarkable suite of islands that have pretty incredible endemism. So we knew that this was the case, and we also knew that when we look at where these islands are in the US, they constitute a very small proportion of the total landmass of the USA. But there is quite a remarkable conservation value that occurs in that very small bucket of islands, particularly when we look at species on the Endangered Species Act and species under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We also know that the Department of Interior is a very large stakeholder when it comes to islands. Nearly 25% of islands nearly 25% of national wildlife refuges occur in this island space. So we know that the Department of Interior has a very high vested interest and understanding and partnership when it comes to thinking about islands. So we are fortunate to be working on a second phase with this program of work, where we are looking a little bit more nationally, and we will be supporting the Department of Interior's National Invasive Species Program to conduct a high-level review of island biosecurity on DOI managed lands with an emphasis on maritime islands. And we'll be working to strengthen the awareness raising and the educational opportunity that might exist within that stakeholder group. We're also going to be providing technical support to a couple of Department of Interior islands, one of which looks highly likely is Palmyra National Wildlife Refuge, where there is also a Nature Conservancy preserve and a US National Wildlife Refuge. These are red-footed boobies from that marvelous place. So watch this space as we continue to work to support our national partners at the Fish and Wildlife Service. So in conclusion, no surprise here for this very well-educated audience. Prevention is better than the cure, and the investment in that space is likely to yield far greater outcomes than it will be to try and treat things if they become established. A lesson that we are learning ourselves and we know is relevant to everybody is that biosecurity is a culture, and strengthening that biosecurity culture at archipelago scales is key. And that recognition that everybody has a role to play in biosecurity, much the same as we do for occupational health and safety and wildfire management. And I really want to underpin that partnership is key to success. It is very rare that anybody, any one management agency will have responsibility for biosecurity from the inception all the way through to implementation. It takes a village to make sure that we reach that end goal of preventing these invasive pests becoming established on our important islands. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it back.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time, Nick and Annie. That was a great presentation. We are going to move on now to Leah Elwell and Stephanie Otts. They'll be presenting on an international approach to addressing aquatic invasive species in commerce. Leah is president of Conservation Collaborations, and Stephanie is director of the National Sea Grant Law Center. Whenever you both are ready, you can take it away.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present in this session today. My name is Leah Elwell with Conservation Collaborations, and I'm joined here today with my project collaborator, Stephanie Showalter-Otts with the National Sea Grant Law Center. But I also want to recognize our other project collaborator, Lisa Debricare with Creative Resource Strategies. So what we want to share with you today is our international approach to addressing aquatic invasive species in commerce. And the issue that we have at hand here really is a reality that if we are trading in live plants and animals, we create an opportunity for aquatic invasive species to enter commerce. And whether we're talking about having contaminated products like you see here on the bottom with this moss ball, or just simply when species that are purchased when they are released, when they're no longer wanted, can become an invasive species. So why is this important? And really, why should we focus on this problem? And, namely, we understand, I think all of us probably on this webinar, that global commerce and e-commerce are increasing every year, which, contributes significantly to this idea that we have invasive species in commerce. It's not only just that it's increasing, it's the number of ways, the volume of species that are moving are significant and growing always. But there's also a number of other factors when we look at this from kind of this North American perspective. There's areas where the regulatory and agency staffing capacity are really just insufficient to deal with this issue, to provide that oversight and compliance, and a whole other suite of gaps that we see, whether it's a lack of industry standards, inadequate labeling, and et cetera. So there's a lot to unpack here and address to make significant progress on this issue. And at the outset of this project, it became very clear too that, they're really, interestingly, much how Nick just ended his presentation, there's a role for many of us to play in this issue in trying to solve this global problem. We often focus on the consumer, and which makes sense because they are responsible for not releasing an unwanted pet. But really, you can see here from this illustration that there's roles for both industry and the regulatory agencies, but also any professional organizations that can help influence and disseminate information as well. So when we tackled this problem and this project, our goal was really manifold, but could we identify different tools or solutions to interrupt that chain of transmission of invasive species and across the entire supply chain? So from growers and porters and distributors and all the way down to the end game of where the species ends up in the hands of a hobbyist. So today what we're going to share kind of in three main elements. There's lots of aspects of this project, and we'll be sharing the resource pages for this at the end, but we're going to focus on the legal framework, the tools and resources, and then the action plan that were developed in the process of this project. So with that, I want to hand the microphone over to my colleague, Stephanie. Welcome, Stephanie, your turn.
Yeah, thanks, Leah. Thanks everyone for joining us today. So in my role within the National Sea Grant Law Center was to kind of approach this issue to gain a better understanding of the legal framework surrounding AIS and commerce, and then to think about opportunities to kind of address some of the challenges. So it's important to keep in mind how broad and wide-ranging AIS and commerce as a pathway is. And there's kind of three things happening that require different legal strategies and solutions. So we have legal trade in high-risk species, right? That there are species being bought and sold that are known invasive risks. And that results because there's inconsistency among and between state species lists. There's inconsistent terminology, there's lack of oversight, enforcement barriers. And that's one bubble. And then there is the issue of contaminated shipments, which we see with the mothball situation, or maybe you've got, some people are buying one type of crawfish and there's something else, in that shipment. So it's a lack of protocols and controls over the sellers of those products. And then there's also the illegal trade in listed species. And I think this is the hardest one to address from a policy perspective. A lot of trade happens within social networks, either online or just person to person, which are hard to detect. There's a general lack of accountability in many e-commerce platforms, and penalties often aren't strong enough to lead to deterrence. And all three of those pathways then contribute to the movement of aquatic invasive species through commercial transactions. And while there's some connections among them, they likely need their own legal solutions. Next slide. So, as we were working on this project with all of the partners, it can be really hard to get your head around what's really happening when you're looking at it broadly as just a pathway of AIS and commerce. And so we wanted to dig into what does the landscape look like if you are looking at individual species. And so we identified 3 species to do research on to identify the challenges. And so we chose red-eared slider, water hyacinth, and marble crayfish. And I'm just going to briefly kind of walk through our findings. Next slide. So red-eared slider is really interesting to look at from a law and policy perspective for a couple different reasons. First, it has a large U.S. native geographic range, which means that in a lot of the country, it would not be listed as invasive, right? It's a native species, but as it is transported around the country, then you have states listing it as invasive. It is also very popular in the pet trade, so it's a common species in commerce. A complicating factor with red-eared slider is that there are public health restrictions on the sale of small turtles to protect humans from exposure from salmonella. And that is something you don't see very often when looking at the regulation of invasive species. And so we have an overlay or an interaction between invasive policy and public health policy. And that means that there's different policy priorities across state agencies or organizations, right? So some entity or agency may want to reduce the sale of red-eared slider to protect public health, and another agency wants to do that so that it doesn't create an invasive risk, right? And the mechanisms that you use to achieve those policy goals may be different. In addition, there are exceptions to some of these regulations. Trade is allowed for some purposes in states, but not others. For instance, maybe you can sell certain color variations of red-eared sliders, but you can't sell others. So it's very complicated. And in these infographics that we'll be showing, we were just trying to provide a way to visualize how diverse the policies are across the country with respect to one species. And if you're trying to get to the point where we have consistent regulation across the country with respect to a species in commerce, you have a lot going on, right, to respond to. And so the green states here, it's not a listed species, there's no regulation. In the yellow states, there is a restriction, but it's for a public health reason. And the red states are invasive, or they just have a blanket prohibition on sale of turtles. And then you get a mix, right? So it's a very complicated landscape. Next slide. Similar here, you're going to see on all of these maps, there's just a lot of color going on, right? So we looked at marble crayfish, and that marble crayfish is kind of a more recent identified invasive risk. It is popular in the aquarium and the pet trade because of the unique aspects of the species, that it kind of emerged potentially from, self-cloning, which gives it kind of a cachet. It's fun, I think, for people to own. Commercial trade does continue despite the demonstrative invasiveness and this concern of how fast they would be able to reproduce. What's interesting from a legal perspective, and why marble crayfish was selected as a case study, is that there was a successful federal Lacey Act prosecution in Ohio for illegal sales that got a lot of attention in the community, and I think has served as some deterrence for continuing, sale of marble crayfish. But, despite the known risks, only about, less than half the country does have marble crayfish listed by name as an invasive species. Those are the red states. And then some states some states prohibit on their invasive or restricted species list all crayfish. So marble crayfish would fall within those. But we have a lot of states that are green where it is unlisted. And so generally that's a pretty big gap when you look at the map. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did propose to list marble crayfish on the injurious species list in January. Not sure, what the fate of that regulation is going to be, but even if they are able to finalize that regulation and add marble crayfish to the injurious species list, that only prohibits the import of marble crayfish into the United States. It does not prohibit the transport of injurious species across state lines. So in order to kind of stop the trade or the flow of marble crayfish around the country, again, there's a need for more consistent state law and policy with respect to the species. Next slide. And our final case study was water hyacinth. We picked water hyacinth just because of how long we have known that water hyacinth is an environmental concern. It has been recognized as a problem for more than 100 years. Back, a long time ago, Florida was already having trouble with water hyacinth clogging waterways and asking the Army Corps of Engineers to take action to address it. And despite that, e-commerce sales of plants and seeds are widespread. And we still have a very patchwork regulatory framework. There are a lot of states that continue to allow the trade in water hyacinth. Another complicating factor is there are two varieties of water hyacinth, anchored and floating, and some states only list one or the other, and that includes the federal government. So federal law restricts only anchored water hyacinth as a noxious weed. So there can be a lot of confusion, right? And requirement, you'd have to be able to identify the difference between these species if you're taking enforcement action or doing something like that. So again, there's big gaps that would have to be addressed to truly address water hyacinth in commerce. Next slide. And that was kind of the next step then in the project, to talk with individuals that were participating in the committees and meetings that were being held as part of this project to identify what are the legal elements needed to address priority gaps. And so out of these conversations emerged 4 priority areas. One is we need to make species list more accessible, right? That states need to adopt and maintain prohibited and restricted species list, and those lists need to be published in an easy to access format on agency websites that are easy to find. In many states, the lists are in their regulatory codes, and if you know where to look, you can find it, but it's not always clear online. There's also a lot of confusion online about education and outreach lists of invasive species that are meant to raise awareness of what species are in a state or we don't want in a state. But those are not necessarily the state's regulatory invasive species list. And it sometimes is harder to find those, which again adds to confusion, especially if you're like a seller trying to figure out what is allowed to be sold in the state. The second one was labeling. Labeling is really important from an enforcement perspective so states should be making sure that, shipments of live plants and animals have detailed labels. We got a lot of feedback that, ideally laws and policies would require the use of the English language and scientific names so that there is consistency across labeling, and prohibit false or misleading information in online advertising. Record keeping kind of follows from the labeling, requiring individuals that engage in trade to generate and keep records. This can help the state during enforcement actions, or if they're just trying to get a handle on what the size of the industry is in their state. And then licensing, like requiring businesses that sell live plants and animals to register or obtain a license, and imposing penalties for failure to do so. Next slide. And all of these elements then fed into one of the final products from the project, which was the development of model regulatory language to address these priority gaps. And so this report was published in February of 2024. It has model language for either legislation or regulations that states could draw on if they wanted to take action to address one of those 4 priority gaps. This document isn't meant to kind of be adopted whole cloth, but rather to be used as a resource and a starting point for conversations about how states or provinces in Canada could, take action. One of the additional pieces that we worked on with the project that is also reflected in the model regulatory language is a classification framework to minimize confusion about what we're talking about when we refer to species that are listed by the state. And the recommendations that came out were to try to use more consistent language that a prohibited species is a species that may not be imported, possessed, sold, purchased, and as kind of established by rule, whereas a regulated species is a species that can be transported, possessed, or sold, but you have to have a permit for that or some other authorization. And then there were a couple other categories of, suggested classifications that relate to species that are authorized by the state. So they've been identified as a species that can be traded in the state, or species that are unregulated because the state has actually said they were unregulated. Or they just haven't gotten around to making a determination, which would kind of be the unlisted species. And so again, these are conversation starters. We're not expecting that states would go back and really overhaul their classification frameworks that are in existing law, but rather to think about how we can talk about these categories in a way that makes it easier to understand what's happening across state lines. Next slide. And then one final piece that we looked at in the project was, because this priority area of licensing came up, we wanted to just explore kind of what is the situation with respect to one type of license. And because we're dealing with AIS and commerce, and a lot of the species that we're concerned about are popular in the pet trade, we decided to look at the regulation of pet stores across the country. And we found there is some regulation of pet stores, but again, it's different depending on what state you're in. Most states do not require a license for a pet store beyond a normal general business license, right? So here we were looking at a specific license to operate a pet store. There are several states that require a license for a pet store, but it's a very narrow scope in the sense that they only are required to get that license if they're selling dogs or puppies. And so that's coming from a USDA regulation that is driven by concerns over puppy mills. And those are the states in yellow. So that necessarily, might not help if you're wanting to try to regulate pet stores to address AIS and commerce. But there are a handful of states, the ones shown in red, that do have a broad licensing requirement for pet stores. So it's a potential model to look at. But important to note that regulatory licensing is a tool that policymakers can use, but it does impose costs on agencies because now they have to implement and manage a licensing program, and industry, right? Because industry has to, pay the cost of that license and comply with the necessary paperwork and reporting. But it can potentially increase interstate consistency, which would enhance oversight and enforcement. And this is a really interesting area where there could be additional research related to the authority of local governments, because local governments in many states have the authority to require local business licenses for pet stores, and many do by local ordinances across the country. So even in the states that are green, where there's no state license requirement, we found a lot of examples of local ordinances requiring licenses for pet stores. And so that's an untapped resource that is available to managers who are interested in trying to address the spread of AIS through pet stores. And next slide. And I think Lisa, I may be coming back to you.
Yep. Thank you, Stephanie. Great. All right. So I'm going to focus on the other two elements of the project, the toolkits and the action plan. And, one of the pieces we pulled together were best practices. And again, with feedback, as you heard from Stephanie, from different entities within industry or management agencies and law enforcement. But here you can see that we kind of categorize the best practices in multiple areas and for multiple audiences. So not only for industry where it seems logical, but also for our federal, provincial, and state agencies. And so, for example, for state agency, we may recommend making sure we're providing education and information to law enforcement staff so they have the tools available to them to recognize what species may be invasive that they're inspecting. Some of the elements that we created also for this project, this is just a schematic, a tool to help folks wrap their minds around the best practices. So if we look at the purple line that goes across the middle, I know the type font's pretty small. I was trying to squeeze it on one slide. This is sort of like as each step as a species may be moving through commerce. In green, we see those potential voluntary practices that could take place. And then in yellow would be agency actions that could also be mitigating. And I circled the one in red really because it's like we're relying so heavily on our industry partners to identify and keep problem-prone species actually out of the supply chain there. So that's really one of those key areas that we, of course, want to recognize. And in listening to industry feedback, of course, what makes a really great pet, it's easy to care for and resilient are often those same characteristics that make them an invasive species in the first place. So the toolkits that we developed, or the resources, are arranged in two ways to enhance the prevention strategies, one for industry and one for agency. And really we have quite a bit here that we put together for our industry partners, ranging from, resources for improving their communication contacts with different entity needs, improving their abilities to be a rehoming institute, understanding what prohibited versus invasive and problem-prone species are. And really the pieces that Stephanie just mentioned, that regulatory framework, that legal terminology, are really, tools that can be integrated as needed for our agency colleagues here. Just want to give an example too of, just another schematic of how we tried to arrange and, encourage the resources that someone might need in terms of context. So this would be for someone within a buyer or seller that needed to understand best practices and who to contact or what species are regulated, and just driving them to the right locations. Okay, the last element of our project was the development of an action plan. And again, we really tried to use a lot of different ways to pull feedback and information from different audiences in industry and agencies, doing surveys and work groups to develop this plan. And the result of that culminated in 71 actions that fell into a suite of different categories. And those buckets that are found in that framework range from, I've emphasized multiple times these voluntary industry practices, and that's one key element there, but innovative technology, knowledgeable consumers, and accessible information, but really a broad range of categories of where, different actions could take place to mitigate this issue. And I'm just going to give you one example from the 71 under accessible information. And, we recognize right now that certainly within the United States, we have different agencies that are collecting information about what species are coming in, but we really need to bolster that. And that's, this first action that's mentioned here is that we need more user-friendly, accessible, searchable, shareable data sets of really tracking of what species are being imported and sold in North America to really grasp kind of what risks we may be facing. So again, there's many more to dig into. But part of this action plan, of course, was to identify who would take the lead and participants and those performance metrics for success. All right. So in closing, I think it's clear that we know that commerce is really one of the key pathways for the introduction and spread of aquatic invasive species. But we do have an opportunity here to improve that interception with increased international coordination and collaboration, because this really is such a global issue. But I also want to emphasize and stress that really everybody in the supply chain has a responsibility to take action and prevent that introduction and spread. To access all of the elements from this project that were shared with you today, and then some that we were not able or have time to mention today, they're housed here if you follow that QR code, and then they will be permanently housed on the Western AIS.org/commerce webpage. And I do want to give my a grateful thank you to the U.S. Department of Interior for funding this important work and this project. So thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Thank you so much, Leah and Stephanie. Really appreciate your time today. Last but not least, we are going to hear from our director, Christy Trifone-Millhouse. She'll be presenting on preventing the introduction and spread of invasive species through NISAW's strategic international prevention programs. Christy, when you're ready.
Great, thank you. Well, greetings. Good to see you all again. As Mara mentioned, my name is Christy Trifone-Millhouse, and I'm the executive director here at NISAW. Invasive species pose a significant threat to our ecosystems, economies, human health, and way of life. And these non-native organisms outcompete, prey upon, and otherwise disrupt native species and habitats, leading to a cascade of negative effects. However, with the right tools and strategies and collaborative efforts, we can work to mitigate these impacts and protect our natural and human environments. NISAW has been at the forefront of invasive species prevention programming, employing a variety of innovative and effective techniques and tools. And today we'll explore some of these initiatives and the incredible investment that was made through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. As many of you know firsthand, prevention is the first line of defense. As you heard in one of our previous webinar speakers, against biological invasion, and is certainly the most cost-effective approach. As we heard earlier this week, prevention includes efforts to stop the introduction via primary and secondary spread mechanisms. NISAW and our partners steward and implement international prevention programs, including Play Clean Go, Stop Invasive Species in Your Tracks, and the Certified Weed-Free Products Program. These well-established programs are aimed at stopping the spread through specific human-assisted pathways. Play Clean Go, which is NISAW's patented outreach campaign, works through partnerships with other environmental, governmental, and recreational organizations and community-based social media marketing and outreach to raise awareness of how and why thousands of invasives are spread every year. Play Clean Go was established over 15 years ago and aims to change the behavior of recreational users so they choose to clean their gear and their pets to prevent invasive species transport and introduction. The Certified Weed-Free Products Program is over 30 years old and is the only program of its kind that aims to stop noxious weeds from being transported in commercial industry pathways, including forage, hay, gravel, compost, and mulch. And this continental invasive species pathway prevention program started as a grassroots effort here at NISAW and now serves a critical function to prevent the spread across the US and Canada. In 2022, NISAW was awarded through the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act funding to expand our prevention programming to affect long-term national landscape scale change. Funding priorities focused on expansion and improvements for the Play Clean Go and Certified Weed-Free Products program, with a focus on boot brush installations in all 50 states, and a deep dive to refresh and reframe the Certified Weed-Free Products program including everything from a name review, rebranding, marketing, strategic partnerships, toolkit creations, online directories, and model legal law models. To help with those, and would like to improve and establish those programs in your area. Understanding the markets that drive these industries, the regulations that govern the inspection and movement of products, and providing tools for the driver for this funding success. I'm going to now review each program and our current to date accomplishments, noting that things have been put on a bit of a pause. So we have not gotten to our final completion for some of these deliverables. So as mentioned, Play Clean Go is NISAW's official branded trademark prevention program aimed at stopping the spread of invasive species through outdoor recreational pathways. So this international campaign, as mentioned, is grounded in community-based social marketing, paired with an on-the-ground campaign that uses boot brush stations to deliver not only education about invasive species, but also a call to action to help steward and protect our critical landscapes by cleaning gear and pets before and aftering you recreate. Thanks to past support from the USDA Forest Service, USDA APHIS, and our partners through the Nationally Coordinated Invasive Species Prevention MOU, more than 300 digital graphics and print-ready materials have been created to simplify social media marketing and in-person prevention outreach for partners, as well as more than 10,000 handheld boot brushes that have been distributed across North America. NISAW's partners have placed more than 500 boot brush stations on the landscape at recreational access points, including trailheads, visitor centers, and parking areas. Finally, there have been over 1.2 million people in just this last year that have interacted with the campaign, either through our socials, Play Clean Go Awareness Week, boot brush stations, webinars, and other media sources. Outreach through a diverse range of methods and communication channels is required to reinforce the message and show the behavior that is necessary for recreationists to clean their shoes, their gear, and pets that could be transporting invasive species. Play Clean Go leverages partnerships in an effort to expand messaging across North America and focuses on connecting with target audiences through shared beliefs and values, education, and a call to action that asks them to sit in the driver's seat of protecting our cherished landscapes. As part of the investment we received, NISAW is working to install 102 boot brush stations on Department of Interior properties, working with most of the leads in each DOI bureau. We have to date distributed 70 boot brush stations in 39 states. All of the other sites have been secured for the remaining 32, and we anticipate delivery in the next few months. All 50 states will have a boot brush station installed through this funding, and priority was given to high visitation sites and sites with highest ecological sensitivity, giving further priority location with ENT species. A critical aspect of these stations is the interpretive panel that one sees when interacting with the station. This is the educational aspect of this asset. With investment, we were able to customize templates to fit different branding requirements for partners like the National Park Service. In 2024, we updated the template to include a QR code, so park visitors can assist with mapping and reporting of invasive species on these lands using the Wild Spotter application. Not only can visitors be empowered to assist with preventing the spread, they can also serve as citizen scientists and help with early detection and monitoring efforts. We are gathering photos to launch a Get to Know Play Clean Go campaign in your state and plan to showcase these sites and many more. Here are just some of the pictures we've been able to collect so far of the diverse locations where boot brush stations have been installed. It's important to note that we won't be stopping this effort when the project is complete. NISAW is working with Play Clean Go Advisory Committee that has representatives from different countries where Play Clean Go can be found. This leadership team will construct a 5-year program plan, review current content for relevance and cultural sensitivity, and will be providing additional materials in a variety of languages. So stay tuned for more. And if you're interested in learning more about the build out of this program and this work plan, contact me. Okay, our second prevention program that this funding infused new energy into was our Certified Weed-Free Products program. So this is the only initiative in North America providing managers and users of these products with the confidence that invasive species aren't spread through high priority transportation pathways. Since its inception in the mid-90s, this program has grown from offering certification for forage and hay to now include mulch, gravel, compost, with the potential to add soil in the future. So our Certified Weed-Free Products Committee looking into that option, so stay tuned. This is a voluntary program, not regulatory, and is growing in response to continuous requests we're receiving for these products from all sectors. Our primary goal is, of course, prevention, but also early detection and rapid response measures through monitoring of these priority pathways and mitigating risks to promote safe trade and interstate commerce. For consumers, these products, additional considerations include cost management, long-term land management, and providing reliable base for restoration and construction projects where these projects are utilized. So how does the program work? NISAW maintains the science-based standards, provides guidelines for implementation, facilitates communication among stakeholders, and works directly with MOU holders and partners who are designated authorities in their state to manage the program. Additionally, we provide inspector certification training to empower consistent participation across jurisdictions. Once certified, inspectors undertake inspection duties in close coordination with their local MOU holder and partner in each state. And this collaborative approach ensures a standardized and effective inspection process exists across different regions. The weed-free product standards are designed to provide assurance that industry products meet a minimum acceptable standard, to provide continuity between the various provinces and states in the program, and to limit the spread through these pathways. Expansion of this program has been steady, and we continue to get calls weekly. There are still gaps in knowledge related to operating this program, and the variations between states has really underscored the need for the ongoing development and continued funding to build out this program. Currently, the states and provinces marked in green and one in blue participate in NISAW's program. And over just the last 2 years, we've secured 5 new MOU holders. Knowing our barriers to success, funding these key areas was vital to the continued advancement of the program. Our first step for this program expansion was to conduct market research studies on all industry products. And these studies were really crucial in understanding the unique needs of different industry sectors. We needed to understand from producer to consumer what these industries look like, who are the major players, what issues are they dealing with, and how these markets are structured. Through this process, we work to build relationships with national industry associations to assess how our program aligns with industry standards and expectations. This collaboration ensures that our programming is perceived as valuable and is perceived as an elevated offering within the industry. Our ongoing partnerships and commitment to these association relationships, we hope will continue to drive the success of the program and ensure that it remains relevant and impactful. After reviewing the market research studies, we used what we found to construct a robust marketing toolkit to effectively communicate this program to a variety of target audience to enhance its visibility. A suite of marketing materials has been created that includes brochures, infographics, fact sheets, and more. These resources are designed to provide clear, concise, and engaging information about the program. Through this process, NISMA had the opportunity to rebrand to ensure that the optics and tone of the brand and programs look professional, aligned with our mission, and gave credibility to the quality of the program as we expand internationally. What you see here are a few examples of the assets I just shared with you, from brochures that offer that comprehensive overview to the infographics that highlight key benefits and statistics in a visually appealing format, to the tags that can be customized. We really tried to think of everything. Additionally, we are offering fact sheets that provide detailed insight and practical information on the program, making it easier for our stakeholders to understand and support the program. So by leveraging these tools, we really aim to raise awareness, drive participation, and establish a reliable and widely recognized initiative. And to further reinforce the credibility and recognition of our program, we've incorporated universal certification markings into all our program materials. So this ensures that our certifications are easily identifiable and trusted by participants and partners across various regions. We offer optional co-branding opportunities, allowing partners and affiliated organizations to incorporate their logos and branding elements into those materials. And this coordinated approach enhances the program's reach and fosters trust and confidence at a local level. We're currently in the process of rebuilding our entire NISMA website to include not only information on our programming, but specifically related to weed-free products, a directory and database that will house information on all of these assets that I just reviewed. There's been some confusion related to this program about what federal agencies and their employees can do. Many federal lands require these products, but are unable to perform inspections to certify the products themselves and struggle to find available certification products for purchase. This can cause delays in contracting and other field and restoration work. Over the past 2 years, NISMA has been working with partners at the Great Smoky Mountains to develop a specific toolkit to support National Park Service to implement a certified weed-free products program. This toolkit will have sample directives to use, links to those who have experience setting up this program, and other sample content to help get a program up and running. I'd like to thank our partners at the Smokies for their time in developing this content. There's really so much more that can be done to support native biodiversity in our park systems through this program, and we're excited to explore the expansion of this aspect of our work. Updated inspector training modules followed the market research study, rebrand, and toolkit creation. NISMA provides a comprehensive training program designed to certify inspectors. This training program provides knowledge and skills needed to ensure they are well equipped to handle the complexities of their inspection duties. By continuously updating and improving our training program annually, we strive to maintain the highest standards of inspection across all participating states and provinces. We hope to have this new training live in the next month. Finally, an ongoing aspect of this funding is focused on creating a model legal framework for noxious weeds. The states that have been successful at implementing the Weed-Free Products Program often have laws and regulations that empower and direct the implementation of the standards for inspection and certification of products. This legal authority typically includes a funding mechanism that supports the staff and program activities. The laws and regulations are not consistent across jurisdictions and may impair interstate commerce and trade as a result. Many eastern states lack invasive species laws entirely and do not have regulation in place. The lack of legal authority and disparate rules and regulations are the top barriers inhibiting the successful adoption of this program. In order to overcome this barrier, NISAW has been working with Stephanie at the National Sea Grant Law Center. So you can see here a familiar looking map. To conduct an inventory on noxious weed statutes, regulations, policies, plant lists, and so on nationwide. This work is similar to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service funded work related to building consensus in the West that produced model legal provisions for watercraft inspection and decontamination programs. To gain a greater understanding of the scope of state authority to adopt and implement an effective program, the National Sea Grant Law Center has conducted a gap analysis of key program elements with input from NISAW's Weed-Free Products Committee. The National Sea Grant Law Center identified 38 policy attributes associated with the Weed-Free Products Program. These attributes include elements such as agency authority to inspect and certify products, enforcement provisions, and funding streams. To conduct this gap analysis, the National Sea Grant Law Center reviewed laws, regulations, and policies of each state for the presence of these 38 elements. This analysis is providing critical insight into policy gaps and challenges that may limit the adoption of the Weed-Free Products Program in some states. The analysis is currently under review by state agencies, and the results are anticipated to be released later this year. Through this work, we've learned a lot of many valuable insights, which will really help to guide our efforts in moving this program forward. The results, as I mentioned, of the gap analysis will inform the development of a model law and regulation package to guide future policy discussions. The model law and regulation will incorporate policy best practices from existing state efforts and guide how to fill policy gaps. This will be an important resource to facilitate conversations about the legal authorities and policies necessary for an effective program in each state. Development is expected to be complete, as I mentioned, later this year, and this model will be offered in an a la carte fashion to provide elements to improve a program that you're currently managing or to create one that doesn't currently exist. So what's next? As I mentioned, we are on a bit of a pause with funding currently, and like everyone else, we hope that opens up quickly. Our deadline for completion of all of our deliverables is August of this year, so stay tuned. And I wanted to mention that this funding has been really, truly transformational for NISAW and our prevention programming. And I'd like to thank our funders that we've been working with at DOI over the last few years and have been so patient and entertained every creative approach we've brought their way and have been endlessly supportive. We look forward to continuing to cultivate relationships with partners and lands that have been impacted by this funding and are eager to share many stories of success as these programs continue to grow. With that, I will stop sharing and hand it back to Mara.
Great. Thank you. And thank you again to all of our presenters. We really appreciate your time and your expertise. It's great to have you. It looks like 2 questions in our Q&A box were answered, and I'm not seeing any more. So I'm going to go ahead and move to our call to action for the day, which is asking you to send a letter to your federal representatives in the House and Senate asking to authorize a complete farm bill. The 2018 Farm Bill has been given a 1-year extension through September 30th, but it's missing key provisions for invasive species management. So we're asking that you scan that QR code or click the link to send a letter to ask for a fully funded 5-year Farm Bill as it was intended. And a huge thank you again to all of our sponsors. This event would not be possible without your contributions. And I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Christy for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Mara. Thanks everyone for attending. As we close the webinar portion of NISAW, I'd like to thank those who helped to make this week possible. Thanks to all the speakers who've been engaging and informative throughout the week, to our premier partners who continue to make it possible for NISMA to provide programming like this. I'd like to give a special shout out to our NISMA Legislative Committee. This committee works throughout the year with our NISMA team to plan this event. And a special notice or special shout out to our co-chairs who lead this effort, Mark Heilman and Carrie Mintier, and many others who participate on this committee. We are looking to expand this committee to include representatives from other regions in North America. So please reach out if you're interested in learning more. I'd also like to thank board members Dia Lawrence, Carrie Mintier, and others who helped to make and create the NISMA position paper on biosecurity. We will be uploading this paper to the website over the next month. And finally, I'd like to thank our NISMA team, Mara Cunningham, Tegan Wilmot, Jody Hogan, John Stabinger, Kim Davidson. We have such an incredible group of talented individuals who are dedicated to putting our mission into action. I wanted to thank our team for all of their incredible work over this last week. Finally, thanks to all of you for supporting NISMA and for participating in NISAW. Continue to take action. We'll send along ways for you to connect with lawmakers in your community. Keep talking to them. Connect with people in your community. Working locally ensures that lands and waters you love that are near and dear to you are preserved for future generations. Happy NISAW 2025, and we will see you next year. Take care.